Recently, I tried out Balatro, and ever since I did, I have been addicted. This game has got me hooked. I'm thinking about it when I'm driving, I'm thinking about it when I'm sleeping. I am hopelessly addicted, which is quite surprising because I really didn't think that this game was going to appeal to me very much. It is, at the end of the day, roguelike poker, and I've never really been much of a poker player. I've always found playing card games to be a bit abstract, a bit dry maybe. They're not really the kind of juicy, flashy video games that I like to play most of the time. And so when I heard about roguelike poker, I thought, that's a cool idea, but it's not for me. But I did end up trying the game, and I'm really glad I did because I think that this might actually be the best roguelike game that's ever been created. Or at the very least, it's certainly the most addictive roguelike game that I've ever played. And I definitely would recommend that you give it a try, even if poker isn't something you're normally very interested in. And in this video, what I want to do is break this down from a game design perspective and try to work out why this game is so addictive, what makes it so captivating, and see if there's any lessons that we can draw out of it to apply to other games. Since I think we could all agree that the world could always do with another addictive game. Now, first, let's start by thinking about the roguelike genre. What is a roguelike game? What makes a good roguelike game? I think what it really comes down to is controlled randomness. A good roguelike game contains a lot of randomness, but you have control over it so that you can shape it into something that works out for you. Roguelike games are also run-based. You always sort of start from the beginning of the game, and you play through until the end of the game, or at least until you get defeated. And that by itself makes them quite replayable, and the controlled randomness is basically how we stop those replays from becoming boring. You want them to be fun because they're a little bit different each time. And it's important that this randomness is controlled because otherwise, if the game was just too crazy random, then the player wouldn't be able to fit together a strategy. They'd just be bombarded with a bunch of stuff that doesn't really work together. And that wouldn't be excited. The game is best when it's walking a tightrope between being chaotic and random on the one hand, and being controllable on the other. So let's now think more about poker, and more specifically about playing cards, which poker is built on. And as you well know, many different games are made on playing cards. It's quite amazing actually how the same deck of cards can be used for so many different games and so many different rules. I think the reason why this is possible is because of the way a deck of playing cards is constructed. They have 4 suits, that is hearts, diamonds, spades, and clubs. And they also have 13 ranks, that is ace, meaning 1, and also 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, jack, queen, and king. And each possible combination of a suit and a rank exists within your deck. For example, if we draw a 7, then we know that there are 3 other 7s in the deck. And we also know that there are 4 6s in the deck and 4 8s in the deck. In other words, there are 8 cards that are adjacent to this 7. And there are 12 cards that have the same suit as the 7. That's a lot of interconnections, that's a lot of other cards that this card is related to in one way or another. And this means that you can then create interesting combinations out of those relationships. This basically is what the game of poker is. It's about taking this deck of 52 playing cards, drawing random cards out of it, and then trying to see what's the most interesting hand you can build out of those combinations. In other words, poker is a game of controlled randomness, and that is exactly what we want in a roguelike. And in fact, transforming poker into a roguelike experience was quite simple for Balatro. All they had to do was add a discard mechanic. When you start a round, you draw 7 cards, and you can look at these and see if you can make an interesting hand out of them. And if you can't, you can discard some of the cards and draw more, allowing you to try and strengthen your hand. Stronger hands are worth more points, and you need points to beat the level. There's a huge amount of tension in this right from the beginning, right with the basic set of cards, because of the way that this discard mechanic works. Suppose that you draw a hand that already contains most of a straight, but not a whole straight. Well, maybe you discard your other cards and you try to finish that straight. But in the process, you might discard a few cards of the same suit, and it takes you further away from assembling a flush. And this is constantly the case. As you're drawing cards and trying to build towards a particular combo, you're also discarding cards and moving away from other combos. There's a lot of tension within that, and it's therefore very skill testing right from the beginning. We could compare this to a game like Slay the Spire, which pretty much invented the whole idea of a card-based roguelike game. And it was a huge sensation when it came out 4 or 5 years ago, whenever it was. And a lot of developers have since tried to copy the game and put their own twist on it, including Balatro. In all fairness, this game is quite clearly a successor to, or at least inspired by, Slay the Spire. The key innovation that made that game so successful was this idea that, okay, you're starting with a deck of cards that are not very good, but over time you're adding cards to the deck, you're taking cards away from the deck, and you're upgrading cards within the deck. And this means you're basically stacking it, moving it towards a stronger and stronger set of combos as time goes on. And if you do this well enough, then your combos will become strong enough for you to defeat difficult enemies and eventually, hopefully, the final boss. It's a really captivating idea, and I'm keen to see what they're doing with Slay the Spire 2, which is currently in development. But the big contrast between this game and Balatro, well, to be fair, there's many differences between Slay the Spire and Balatro, but this is the one I really want to focus in on. In Slay the Spire, your starting deck is crap, whereas in Balatro, your deck is already full of combos. It has all of the different ways that you can build poker hands from a deck of playing cards, and each of those hands is worth a certain amount of points. And so you're being skill tested right from the beginning, and there's a lot of tension and controlled randomness from the moment you start a new run. And all of this means that the game could actually have been pretty fun without any roguelike mechanics in it at all. In fact, I like to imagine that there's a parallel universe out there where this game was released, but it didn't have any roguelike inspiration. It was simply a sort of a solitaire poker kind of game. And I think a game like that would still have an audience. I think there's people who play solitaire who would enjoy a game like that as a little sort of time passer on their phone. But having said that, what really makes Balatro special is all of the roguelike progression mechanics, which layer more and more levels of controlled randomness on top of the game's foundation. The most noteworthy of these is of course the jokers, after which the game is named. The word Balatro means joker or jester in ancient Latin. And yes, I did have to look that up. After each round you go to a shop, and in the shop you get random jokers that you can buy with your money. These cards don't go in your deck, they go above your deck. You have 5 slots for them, and each joker gives you a different ability. One of your jokers might say, every time you play a hand containing a pair, you get more points. Or another one might say, you can make straights and flushes using only 4 cards instead of 5 cards, which is particularly crazy when you consider it lets you make a straight flush out of nonsense. There's a huge amount of different jokers in the game, and surprisingly they're all pretty useful, especially at the beginning of the game before you've really decided what direction you're going to build in. And that's because, once again, your starting deck is so strong, it has so many combos within it, that virtually any joker will combo with your deck. It's just a question of how well. And each of the different hand types that you can make in poker, such as the 3 of a kind, or the straight, or the flush, these poker hands can each, as well as being a combo, can be thought of as being an archetype that you can build into. One time you might be playing a deck that's particularly strong at playing straights, and another time you might be playing a deck that's particularly good at playing pairs. And you can take this even further by using the planet cards. You can find these from booster packs, and each planet that you draw from these packs can upgrade a particular hand, making you earn a lot more points when you play that hand. And if you can find the right jokers and the right planet cards, then even something as basic as a high card hand, that is a hand with no particular combo in it, can be upgraded to the point where it becomes a way of winning the game. And then on top of all of this, we can layer on the idea of tarot cards, which you'll be familiar with if you've ever seen JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. Each of the different tarot cards has an effect that can modify the cards in your deck, stacking your deck in various ways. For example, turning more of your cards into hearts so that it's easier to make a heart flush, or changing the ranks of your cards so that you can get pairs or full houses more easily. There's a whole range of different effects like this, and you can even put different kinds of special effects onto your cards, like making a card be worth more chips, or even making it generate more tarot cards. And when we put all of these layers together, we've got the draw and discard, we've got the jokers, we've got the planet cards and the tarot cards, and a couple of extra things like vouchers and spectral cards. There's a huge number of different levels of randomness, and yet, at the same time, because there's so many different combos possible in your deck, you can still pull all of this randomness together and wrangle it into something that's winning. Another game that I'd like to compare this to is The Binding of Isaac, which is one of the older roguelike games. In fact, I think it was just about the first of the modern roguelike games, perhaps after Spelunky. And this game was famous for having a huge number of different items in it. And these items would have effects on them that synergize in much the same way that jokers work in Balatro. And the player of The Binding of Isaac is always hoping to find really good synergizing combos that turbocharge them and allow them to sort of tear through the game and eviscerate the final boss. And sometimes you'll get a combo like that, but other times you won't. And then you have to rely more on your skills because the game will be a lot harder. And so there's this really interesting combination of skills on the one hand, because it is a fast-paced action game, but then also this luck element that's very high-rolly, like a slot machine where you're always trying to get that insane combo. When we compare this to Balatro, the interesting thing is that it's not so much like a slot machine where you get a broken combo sometimes, but rather because it's so controllable, you can get a broken combo of one sort or another almost every time if you have your eyes open and you're looking for really good purchases. In fact, I would say that the game as a whole feels a lot like you are playing a game of poker in a casino and you are just flagrantly cheating. You are pulling cards out of your pocket and removing cards from your deck and scribbling things on your cards and even just making up whole new rules like a child on the playground saying, "Nuh-uh, when this happens, I get to do that." So you're doing all of these different things that ordinarily would be considered cheating in poker. And yet, the game is expecting you to do it. It's a part of the game. And it's almost like the game is taunting you, challenging you. How far can you take it? Can you break me? And if you have enough skill at the game, you often can. And beyond all of this, the sort of icing on the cake is that the game comes with many different deck types that each put a bit of a different spin on the game, sort of like characters in other roguelike games, and it also has a range of ascension difficulty levels. Each time you beat the game with a particular deck, you unlock a higher difficulty mode for that deck, and this allows you to calibrate the difficulty level to your skill level, getting harder and harder and harder until you reach the point where the difficulty is just right for you. And this is important again for making a replayable game, because if you want to make players enter the flow state where they're having maximum enjoyment with a game, what you have to do is find that balancing line right between the game being too hard for them and too easy. That is the sort of channel within which players are learning the most and also having the most fun. And so when you put all of this together, I think that the secret to Balatro is, firstly, just the sheer amount of randomness in this game. Truly unexpected and chaotic things can happen. And yet at the same time, how controllable it is. It never feels overwhelming, the randomness. It feels like you can master it, you can ride it like a surfer on a wave. And the means through which it managed to achieve this is by building the game on top of poker, which itself provides a very strong foundation of controlled randomness. You're drawing through many different cards, but those cards can combine in so many different ways that almost regardless of what you draw, you can make something. The question is just, how much can you improve it by? In turn, that allows the developer to crank the randomness up to 11, and the more randomness, the more things that can happen, and therefore the more replayable, the more addictive the game is. So how can we apply that lesson to future roguelike games? Is there sort of a crystallized little nugget that we can draw from this? I want to look at this from maybe a slightly weird angle here. Let's compare the game to the original Rogue, that is, the game that all roguelikes are descended from. When that game was created in the 80s or 90s or whenever it was basically a sort of a Dungeons and Dragons simulator for PC. It had randomized dungeons in it, and you would play through the game each time with a new set of dungeons, and you would die a lot in various horrible ways. If you put Rogue and Balatro sort of side by side and compare them, what really strikes me is actually how little they have in common. Almost everything in the original Rogue has been discarded by the point you get to Balatro, and only a couple of things remain. And so I'd like to suggest that maybe we look at these games a bit differently. Instead of thinking of them as roguelikes, we should think about them as randomized run-based games, because that's a more descriptive name. Now obviously the word roguelike is still an important term, it's very useful, people know what it means, people who buy games search for that term, so I'm not saying we get rid of the idea of a roguelike. I'm just saying that as people interested in game design, it's good to have different lenses through which you can look at things, and if we look at Balatro through the lens of being a randomized, run-based game, I think it reveals that there's actually a lot of unplowed fields out there of similar games that could be made. Getting away from this idea of it being Dungeons and Dragons purely, or a dungeon crawler, instead thinking, hey, maybe we can make a game that's about cooking, because cooking, after all, is an activity where you have many different ingredients, and those ingredients could be combined into a range of different recipes, and of course each ingredient can go into many recipes. A carrot could go into a salad and also a soup and also a pie, for example. And I think similarly you could do something with the brewing of potions or anything else where you have combinations of ingredients. Those are just some ideas that I've been mulling over in my head. I'm sure there's plenty of other ways you could take this idea of randomized runs and then fill them with lots of different combos. But I do think the key element to remember is to try and make it so that the player's options, whatever those options may be, whatever they're themed as, can be combined freely in a range of different ways, some of which are stronger or weaker than others. Thanks for watching all the way to the end of this video. These days I'm making them a lot more frequently than I used to, and you can expect a new video every Friday. So if you want to hear more of my game design musings, or if you want to follow along with progress on my own game, which is a sort of an Anthill simulator kind of a game, then be sure to give the channel a follow. And I will see you next time.